Today is Sunday, April 10th, 2016, and this is the beginning of a Veterans History Project interview with an Air Force Sergeant, Paul Frank Schikal. Our conversation is being recorded at Thousand Oaks, California. My name is Anthony Moralian, and I am going to be doing the interviewing. It now begins. So, Paul Schikal, please tell us what branch of service you were in during the time you served and during what years.
Well, hello classmates. I'm glad to be with you today. This was a very interesting project that I agreed to, and I'd be very happy to fill you in on what's going on. I was in the Air Force from 1951 through 1972, 21 years. I started off as a lowly corporal, and I ended up as a master sergeant after the 21 years. In the beginning, I started off as a cook, and when I ended up, I was a weather technician doing meteorology work for the Air Force.
Next question. What was your highest rank?
My highest rank was master sergeant when I graduated, when I retired, I should say, from Edwards Air Force Base in 1972.
So next are a couple questions of your life before entering the service. So first question was, where were you born?
I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I went to St. Joseph's Preparatory School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was a magnificent school, but unfortunately, when I graduated in 1949, I wasn't prepared to move ahead in my career. But things came to a head very quickly, because while in high school, I, for extra money, joined the Philadelphia National Guard, and I was in the Philadelphia National Guard when President Truman activated my squadron, the 111th Bomb Squadron in Philadelphia, to participate in the Korean War. That was in 1951.
What was your family background?
Family background was very simple. Had a sister and a brother and myself. We were 3 children living in Philadelphia. My father had his own business, working in the center of Philadelphia as a hairdresser, and as I said, he owned the whole business. My mother was a housewife, working at home, keeping us all healthy and good.
Next question. What were you doing just before you went into the service?
I had just started with Sears and Roebuck's. You can say what I wasn't happy with that job after leaving a prestigious school such as the Preparatory School of St. Joseph's, but I was working there at a measly $35 a week, which was a lot of money for somebody in my position in Philadelphia, when President Truman decided that this squadron that I was in was going to be involved in the Korean War, and we were activated to federal service, and I was sent to Spokane, Washington.
How did your parents feel about you entering the Air Force?
They were very disappointed. My mother kept saying, promise me you'll go to graduate school and become an officer. I don't want you to, and make sure you don't get any tattoos.
All right, here are a couple questions of during your service time. Next question is, where did you go to basic training?
That's interesting. Because of the quickness of what was going on with the Korean War, and I was in the National Guard, there was no basic training. I had, after joining the National Guard, participated in 2 weeks out of every month going to classes and learning a trade, how I could learn how to be a cook in the basement of the Philadelphia airport. You can understand it just didn't work out. So when we were called in to join the federal service, we were sent to Spokane, Washington, and at that time they decided they had to send me to cook and baker school in Ethan, Alabama. I should say Dothan, Alabama, excuse me, it was Dothan, Alabama. And there we went for 6 weeks to learn how to serve and take care of the dining halls wherever we were to be assigned.
Next question. What unit were you assigned to?
I was in the 111th Bomb Squadron, Philadelphia National Guard, and that's how it stayed while I was in federal service.
Next question. Where did you go after training?
After training, we were in Spokane, Washington, and went to the Cook and Baker School, and went along with that till I finally got discharged from the military in 1952, when it was decided that there was a stalemate in Korea and there was no further action, and President Eisenhower had just been elected, and he made it very clear to the Koreans that if they didn't stop and desist from the fighting, that he would take some drastic action against them. They became so concerned with that kind of a warning that they finally ceased all warfare on the Korean Peninsula, and I left the Air Force to go back to Philadelphia. When I got back to Philadelphia, I decided to go back to Sears and Roebuck and see what I could get, because remember, this was the time when people were still being drafted. There was no voluntary service. So I had something I could offer Sears, and that was, if I come back to you, you don't ever have to be worried about me drafting again. You're going to get a full-time employee. They considered giving me an assistant manager's position with a $5 pay raise, which was not acceptable to me. So I started to look around real fast and decided that after 30 days, in those days you only had 30 days to re-enlist if you wanted to keep your grade, and I was a sergeant at that time. So I traveled back to Spokane, Washington in November of '52 in a very severe weather, and got back there in just enough time to re-enlist, and that's how my federal career really began.
Next question. What exactly was your job title / assignment?
Well, first of all, I went in there as a cook, and that didn't work out. They tried telling me what to cook. I wasn't used to cooking for 600 or 700 people, and I remember one day they told me I was in charge of preparing creamed beef for the troops for breakfast. And I asked around, how do I do this? And the one Weisheimer there said, read the cookbook. So I just got a case of canned milk out of the storeroom, cracked open every one of those cans of cream, dumped it into a pot, and stirred it up and thickened it up, and said, cream beef is ready. Well, they had enough cream beef there for 3 days, and I remember everybody saying, we need some cream beef, there's nothing in the storeroom. They didn't know that I had used it all up in that one meal, and it became evident to my superiors at that time I wasn't in the right position. So they told me, how would I like to get into truck driving and deliver the supplies of food to all of the various mess halls at Fairchild Air Force Base, which I took.
Next question. What memories did you miss most from home / how did it feel to be away from home for so much time?
Didn't bother me a bit. I had never had so much freedom in all my life. Nobody told me when I had to be home, what I had to eat, what I had to drink, and I took full advantage of my time being alone. I loved it.
Next question. How did you communicate with your loved ones at home, and what was the mail service like, and how long did it take to get a letter?
Well, you're right there. We didn't have email in those days. This was in the early 50s, and you wrote a letter, and you can expect it to be back in Philadelphia from Spokane, Washington, I would say in about 3 or 4 days. And inversely, they would send me a letter back. So it was all either by phone or by letter, and that's the only way we would communicate at those times.
While in the service, was alcohol or drug consumption a problem for units from what you observed?
Drugs, if there were drugs available, I knew very little about it. I wasn't really interested in drugs. I had no desire to even have a taste of drugs. But I did like to go out and have a couple drinks with the guys and the ladies, if we were fortunate enough to find those in the clubs that we attended. So we did just have the drinks, normal, didn't get adversely over-abbreviated. But at that time, I was fortunate to buy my first car, and I had that advantage of that car. And it was really great for me, because when I got short of money, and there was always a shortage of money, I could rent that car out to my friends that they could use it on the weekend, which wasn't too smart because I found out later on they were abusing that car, so I stopped it eventually. But I had cash coming in from the rental of the car, and I did have my salary from the Air Force.
Next question. What was your worst experiences while being in the Air Force?
Oh dear, worst experiences. I don't really find anything that was really bad for me. I guess when I was given the opportunity to apply for an overseas assignment, which I really wanted to go to Europe, and I applied for England, and I was fortunate to get that. Well, what happened was the night before I was ready to leave or going to be sent to England, I just got a notion in my mind to throw some snowballs. And it was very cold and wet, and I made my snowballs and I threw it at the door of the air police station. And that wasn't a wise thing to do. They came running out. I thought I was being cute by doing it. They grabbed me, took me into the air police station, and contacted my first sergeant and said, "We got this fella here, Paul Schikal, in the Huskow here, and he says we can't do anything to him because he's scheduled to leave for Philadelphia and eventually England tomorrow. What should we do for him?" And they said, "Make sure he leaves the base immediately." Well, I wasn't going to leave the base immediately because from Spokane to Washington to Philadelphia was 3,000 miles, and I had to travel there by car. So I snuck into my old room, which was now deserted in the barracks, slept there overnight, snuck out of there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and headed home. And I think that was about the worst experience, and enjoyed my trip to England. We went by ship in those days. There was no flight by airplanes. It took us 7 days on the Her Majesty's, not the Her Majesty's, the American ship, Navy ship, the Butler. And we spent some time, the 7 days in there, and I never applied for any positions, or when they called out your name on that ship to report to a certain area, I was told by a guy that had been on trips before, don't go, because all they're going to do is put you to work, and you don't want to work if you can get away from it. So I hid and never reported to anybody. And for 7 days, I was on board on the top of the ship in the middle of February, reading From Here to Eternity. I read all the way through that book, enjoyed it tremendously before I saw the movie, and when we landed in Southampton, England, and you left the ship, you had to give them your last name and your serial number. And when I gave them that, they said, "Wait a minute, where have you been for 7 days? We've been looking for you for 7 days." And I said, "Well, I've been here. Nobody's bothering me." So by that time, everybody on the gangplank coming down was screaming to go ahead, get out. We want to leave the ship. So they didn't keep me to ask me any more questions. They just let me proceed to leave the ship, and that was the end of any problems I had.
Next question. What did you and others do to let off steam?
Oh, now, I don't know if I want your classmates to know all the details about this, but we would just go after a day's work and have a drink, and we'd go to clubs. And I was very much into dancing, learned how to dance on my own, and the English guys that were there, the English men, their servicemen or the civilians, were adverse to going up and asking a young lady to dance. I don't know why. I just had no problem. I would go up, ask them, and had a dance, and I had lots of friends.
Next question. What were some of the pranks that you and others would pull?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I know there were plenty of them, but I really can't remember a serious prank that I did to anybody while I was in the service. So I'll pass on that.
Okay. Next question. What do you remember about your last day in the Air Force?
Well, last days in the Air Force, I was approaching the age of 42, and I was now a master sergeant, and I was a first sergeant at Edwards Air Force Base. I was in charge of the Raywinson department. That's where we released the meteorology balloons to measure the pressure and find out what's going on in the atmosphere before NASA would be releasing any of their information on space controls. So my wife at the time, who was English, who I married in England, kept insisting for me to get out of the military because she was concerned that my next assignment after Edwards Air Force Base would be Vietnam, and she would be stuck. So I went looking for a job in computer science because I had taken some classes and I had a certificate. Well, I found out from the headhunters on Wilshire Boulevard that a certificate was worthless, and you needed a degree in order to get something going for you in the computer employment. So on my way home, I passed the federal building at 11,000 Wilshire, and there was a big sign that said, "We help veterans." I stopped the car, went inside. There was a gentleman with his feet up on the table, smoking a cigarette and reading a newspaper. And he asked me what he could do for me. And I said, "I'm looking for a job." And he said, "What kind of a job?" And I said, "A job just like yours." And he said to me, "Come with me." And he took me and he introduced me to some people. And he said, "If you can get your commander at Edwards Air Force Base to approve a 2-week training session with us, we will then determine whether or not you would be a good fit for us." He agreed to that. I stayed in a motel on Wilshire Boulevard, went through the 2-week training period. They picked me up and assigned me as a veterans counselor, and I became a civilian, bought a house in Calabasas, and at the end of 22 years with the Veterans Administration, I ended my career there as the loan guarantee officer in charge of the entire division as a GS-15, which was a great place to be, and it's been great for me in my retirement.
Next question. How did your experiences in the Air Force affect your life?
They affected me greatly because it gave me structure, and it gave me the understanding of what you need to do to get ahead in life. If it wasn't for that, I would not have had learned anything that has proven to be well in my retirement time, to know responsibility and make sure that I do a good job for my family.
Next question. What do you think you gave up while serving in the Air Force?
I gave up nothing. I gave up, if it wasn't for the Air Force and giving me an understanding of what life was all about and traveling, and it gave me a lot of leadership positions, which came to be very valuable for me as a civilian. So the military was terrific, and I recommend it to any young individual that is not structured yet and is looking for a path to the future.
Next question. What were the pros and cons while serving in the Air Force?
Well, the pros were that you had a steady job. You had income coming in every 2 weeks, every month, and the inconveniences, of course, were the traveling. I never stayed in one place for more than 18 months, except when I went with my family to London, and we were for 3 years, bought a house there, lived normal lives, had a great time. So there was no inconveniences that I would ever regretted going into the Air Force for.
Next set of questions are about experiences after getting out of the service. So next question. What did you do in the days and weeks after you got out?
Well, I think I've covered that a little bit earlier already, but I got to say this one thing. I made sure that before I left the position, I always had something to go to and was waiting for me. When I left the Air Force in October of 1972, I knew that in November, the next day after I retired, I had a job waiting for me. The same thing happened after I retired from the Veterans Administration in the loan guarantee position. When I left there in November, again, in 1997, I started at Countrywide Home Loans, and I worked there the next day after I left the Air Force, and after 5 years, I was a vice president at Countrywide Home Loans. And when I retired from Countrywide Home Loans in 1997, maybe I got those dates wrong. When I left the Veterans Administration, it was 1992. When I left Countrywide, it was 1997. When I retired from Countrywide in 1997, I worked and became the Director of Customer Service for a company in New Hampshire. I was director of their national field operation, bringing in customers to them because of my background that I picked up while I was with Countrywide and with the Veterans Administration. So what the point I'm making was there was never a day that I skipped without to move ahead to the next job where I didn't already have it lined up. I didn't take any 30-day vacation or 60-day vacation. I always made steps to go from one job to the next one directly.
Next question. How hard was it to adjust to civilian life?
Never hard at all. I had a loving wife at the time. She's passed away, unfortunately, in 2008. But at that time, she was very supportive. She always took care of the children while I was out looking and working. So we did fine.
Next question. What had changed when you got back home?
Back home from where?
From the service.
Oh, from the service. Well, remember I was at Edwards Air Force Base, and I made sure that with the children, we always traveled. We never stayed at the base. Every weekend, we would get in a car and go someplace. I don't care where it was, whether it was Disneyland. We tried to go to the beach quite a bit. And we became very familiar with the Zuma Beach area and all the other attributed beaches along there. So that when we were thinking about retirement, we had already made up our mind where we wanted to retire to. I didn't want to go back to Philadelphia. We wanted to go to Los Angeles in that area because we were very familiar with that at that point. So there was no transitional problems. We had a house waiting for us when we left the base at Edwards Air Force Base, moved in, and it was a 5-bedroom house. And it was very reasonable. I remember it was $33,000 in 1972, which isn't a lot of money. We were very fortunate to sell it in 1997 when we moved here to Thousand Oaks.
Next question. What effect did the war have on your physical and mental health, or that of others you knew?
Well, the wars had no effect on me whatsoever because I was very fortunate in where I served. I was never in a warfare area. I was in during the Korean period. I was in the Vietnam area, but I never participated in any of that. Now, I knew friends, and I still have friends that went to Vietnam, and they are suffering from Agent Orange. One of them is 100% disabled because of his affiliation with the war in Vietnam. But the worst place I've ever served, the most hardship I ever had when I was in the Air Force, when I was assigned to a 1-year remote assignment in Tin City, Alaska. It's about 60 miles north of Nome, Alaska. It's at the closest point to Siberia. We were right across, Tin City was right across the Bering Sea at Siberia, and that was the worst I've ever suffered. The cold and the miserable conditions there, but we adapted, and after 1 year, we finished that remote assignment, and because of that, I was able to pick a better assignment. If you were in the Air Force and you went to a remote assignment, the next assignment would be a good one, and that was the one where we went to London, England for 3 years.
Next question. What advice would you give a young man or woman going into the service today?
Be as prepared as you can and learn as much as you can when you're in high school, so you have something that you can fall back on. As a last resort, if you have the inclination to go into the service, I would say that's fine, but I would avoid going into the Marine Corps, and I would be avoiding to go into the Army, because those are the ones.
We had a short break to change the memory card, but Paul Schikal would like to elaborate on a recent question we've just asked.
Hi, folks. I'm back again. Just wanted Anthony reminded me of something that happened to me when I was in Alaska, and I didn't have an opportunity to elaborate on that. But let me just say, when I was in Tin City, Alaska for that 1 year remote that occurred in 1963-64, the reason we were in Alaska is that it was a remote radar site, and we were there to give early warning to headquarters in Anchorage, Alaska, Anchorage Air Force Base, if we were able to see anything on the radar that the Russians were doing that would be concern to our military. Remember, this was 1964, and we were still going through the Cold War. I often ask why the heck we're all out there. We were, in the outfit that I was in weather, so we were responsible to go to the airfield from the base. The base was against a mountain, and it was practically underground because of the heavy snow that we received there in the wintertime. So we had to travel the 2 miles from the base to the air base where we had our sites. And one day, it was extremely foggy. And when the fog cleared a little bit in the morning, and I looked out my observation window, we were right there on the coast of the Bering Sea. I noticed a ship. And I thought, what is the ship doing? I've never seen a ship there before. All we saw was water. And it had a Russian flag on it. So I called the main base. I said, there's a Russian ship out there. They said, that's impossible. I said, I'm looking at it. What do I do? They said, well, you better be prepared. You got a weapon out there, don't you? I says, yeah, I have a carbine, which is practically nothing, with 15 rounds of ammunition. It'll take me 10 rounds to zero in, leaving me 5. There must be 100 people on that ship. What's this all about? He says, we're in the process of notifying Anchorage Air Force Base right now of what you're reporting, but nobody knew that the ship was there. Sure enough, within 30 minutes, a flight of Thunderbird aircraft flew over, confirmed that the ship was there, and you know what? Within an hour, they called me back, and they said, what did they see? I said, they're leaving. The ship is gone. So that was, here we are, a radar site, keeping touch of what is going on in Russia, and here, Paul Schikal, one singular guy on the airbase. I'm the first guy that sees the ship, and nobody, the radar didn't know nothing. So that was an interesting piece, I think, would be interesting to the group there at school. You have another question?
No more questions, but is there anything you would like to elaborate on?
Oh.
Any information that you think would be interesting for my class to know?
I've had an interesting life. I'm very fortunate. I'm 85 years old, and I'm still able to remember dates and facts. So